It smelled of cedar and old paper. I opened the attic door the morning after Mom's funeral, expecting to see the familiar piles of boxes, notebooks, and scrapbooks she'd left behind for us to sort. Instead, I found gaps, empty spaces where our childhood should have lived. I sold a few things, my sister Lila said casually over the phone that afternoon. A few things? I repeated, my voice trembling. Just letters, diaries, keepsakes, stuff you don't really need. Her tone was light. But I could hear the profit behind it, the satisfaction of owning what I had loved and selling it as if it weren't ours. I sat among the dust motes in the attic light, scanning the bare floorboards where my memories had once been stacked in cardboard and cloth. My mother had kept everything. Ticket stubs from our first movies, my father's old notebooks, letters written in looping cursive that spoke of love, fear, and everyday wonder. And now they were gone. Sold to strangers, auctioned for coins, I didn't call her. Not immediately. I let the anger settle into something colder, more precise, something that felt like justice without being violent. I began leaving notes. Tiny slips of paper, unsigned, in her apartment, at her workplace, tucked inside books she had on her shelves. Messages she couldn't ignore. Some memories aren't yours to sell. Do you remember the summer of '92? She kept letters for a reason. She laughed them off at first, thinking them pranks. But I was systematic. I tracked down buyers when I could. Small estate auctions, online sales, antique shops. I began piecing together what was lost, not to reclaim it for myself, but to remind her that memory is not something that can be commodified. The first recovered item was a diary, my mother's handwriting, faded but precise, bound in soft brown leather. I slipped it anonymously into her mailbox with a note. This belongs where it will be read, not sold. I imagined the surprise, the creeping unease that would grow as more and more things began to return. Memory, I realized, could be a weapon. Not the kind that leaves scars, but the kind that changes how a person sees themselves. Every note, every returned item was a mirror held up to her conscience, and Lila would have to look. That was the beginning. Quiet, relentless, unseen. My revenge didn't shout. It whispered. It turned what she had taken into something she couldn't ignore, something that haunted the edges of her life like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. And I was only getting started. I started with the small leads. Auction listings, estate sales, online forums where collectors traded old letters and keepsakes. Every name, every lot number became a breadcrumb in a path only I could follow. I moved silently, methodically. Lila had no idea her actions had consequences beyond immediate profit. She didn't anticipate a ghost tracking her every move. Not a literal ghost, but a shadow cast from memory itself. The first discovery was in a dusty antique shop 3 towns over. A brass lockbox, scratched and dented, with faded handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's. I held it in my hands like a talisman. Each dent, each smudge carried a story. I left the shop quietly, leaving cash on the counter without explanation. Later that night, I placed an envelope under Lila's door. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed in a font she would recognize but could not trace. Some things are not for sale. They remember differently than you do. Next, I tracked a series of letters sold online. They had been bundled, mislabeled as Victorian ephemera by whoever bought them from Lila. Each one had my mother's looping handwriting, telling stories of love, discipline, and small domestic victories. I didn't buy them all. I left a few traces, photocopies, notes tucked in envelopes, messages suggesting that someone knew where they were and that they weren't meant to disappear. The notes grew bolder over time. You cannot sell what was never yours. She remembered us because she had to. You forget at your peril. Each time I imagined Lila's pulse quickening as she read them. She didn't know whether to fear, to laugh, or to feel guilt, but she felt the attic box itself became a symbol, a repository of absence. I left a small unmarked package on her doorstep, the diary I had recovered, tied with a ribbon. No explanation. Just the object. I watched from across the street. Lila opened the door, peered inside, and the first crack appeared in her composure. Her fingers trembled as she held the diary, flipping it open, reading passages she couldn't remember writing, feeling the weight of years she'd chosen to profit from rather than preserve. That was when I realized the truth. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to argue. Memory was far more effective than rage. Memory was a weapon, and I held the entire armory. By the end of the month, small packages appeared with increasing frequency. A faded photograph of our mother in her garden, a pressed flower from a scrapbook, a letter addressed to me that had never reached my hands. And all the while, Lila's world shifted imperceptibly. She became careful, hesitant, checking online listings more often, second-guessing her sales, even questioning the value of profit versus inheritance. The attic, once empty, had begun to fill again, not with things, but with presence. The past was returning, and it was not silent. By the time I had mapped out nearly every sold item, I no longer needed guides. The patterns were obvious. People who bought keepsakes often posted photos online, bragged in forums, or listed items for resale. I moved through these traces like a shadow, leaving breadcrumbs that only Lila could see. The first echo I left was simple. A note slipped inside the envelope of a sold diary. "Do you remember who we were?" The buyer assumed it was a mistake, perhaps sentimental, but I knew the note would find its way back to Lila. I always made sure of that. Next, a small, playful escalation. I mailed her a single pressed flower, the kind Mom always pressed between pages of a book. Alongside it, "This garden grows in memory. Do not uproot it again." She called me the next morning, her voice tight. "Who's sending me these things?" "I don't know," I said calmly. "Maybe someone who remembers." I could hear the tension coil on the other end of the line. That was my goal, not confrontation, but disquiet. Then I began returning items anonymously. Not all at once. Not enough for a scene, just a single letter here, a photograph there, each carefully timed so she would find it in a place she would notice. On her kitchen counter, slipped under her car windshield, inside the envelope of her mail. Each returned item carried a silent accusation. A reminder. She started asking questions of everyone she knew. Friends, neighbors, even casual acquaintances. "Did you see anything? Letters, photos, keepsakes?" "No," they said. Nothing unusual, but her eyes betrayed her. She began to doubt, to feel watched, to understand that her theft, her casual disregard for what was sacred, had consequences she could not fully escape. I saved the most meaningful for last. The attic box itself, the collection of letters, photographs, and keepsakes I had pieced together, arrived in her mailbox one evening. No return address, no explanation. Inside, a note, plain and direct. "This is your inheritance. Handle it with the care you once refused." The effect was instantaneous. She could not hide the tremor in her hands as she lifted the lid. She could not feign surprise at the sight of our childhood carefully restored. She had lost the ability to dismiss the past. It was then that I understood. Revenge did not need to destroy. It could restore, and it could teach. Memory, when returned, was more powerful than anger. It haunted, yes, but it also illuminated. The attic was no longer empty. The items had returned. The past had been reclaimed, not for me, not for her, but for what we had been before betrayal. And Lila would never forget the hands that guided it all back. I had waited for the right moment. Not a dramatic unveiling. Not a confrontation in front of witnesses. Just timing, patience, and the slow inevitability of what she had done catching up to her. The attic box was complete. Every letter, diary, photograph, and keepsake that Lila had sold or discarded had returned. Carefully placed, delivered anonymously, or mailed through friends and strangers who unknowingly became couriers of my quiet justice. I had documented it all in my own ledger. Items recovered, dates and a simple note beside each. Returned, remembered, reckoned. The final act was the note I left in her mailbox on a rainy morning. A simple piece of stationery, unmarked, folded in 3. "You cannot sell what belongs to memory. You cannot erase what was never yours to erase. Handle it now with the care it always deserved." I knew she would read it, reread it, and finally understand the weight of what she had done. That afternoon, I watched from across the street as she opened the attic box for the last time. Her hands shook. She pulled out the diaries, the letters, the pressed flowers, each object a shard of our childhood, restored to its rightful place. I imagined her piecing together the stories she had sold, the moments she had ignored, the life she had attempted to commodify. Her face went pale. Not with fear, not with guilt, with recognition. Recognition of the truth she could no longer escape. I never approached her. I never explained. Some lessons are too powerful to be explained. They must be felt. Weeks later, the attic was silent again. But it was not empty. It smelled of cedar and paper, yes, but also of care, of restoration, of a past honored rather than stolen. I wrote the last entry in my ledger. Attic box, complete. Memory reclaimed. Lesson delivered. Closure attained. I closed the book and walked away. The final act of revenge had not been loud. It had not broken anyone, but it had restored the only thing that truly mattered, the past. And it had left its mark where it mattered most, in Lila's understanding, in her conscience, and in the knowledge that memory, once weaponized, cannot be ignored.